hopefully you enjoyed seeing that. At the end, the police officer was saying, you're working in a barista stand wearing a bikini is not a quid pro quo. That's something that we're going to talk about later when we get to other kinds of victimization in another chapter. And but what he's talking about is just because a person is wearing a bikini does not mean that they deserve to have somebody's genitals flashed at them. The idea that you have women alone in a barista hut means that it's more likely that they can be victimized. It really kind of doesn't matter what they're wearing. And I think there's probably a lot of stories that women in barista stands can report that are very similar to this, and the women were not wearing bikinis. It's just something that happens with exhibitionistic disordered people who want to shock their victim. Now, the barista throwing the boiling water on him actually probably gave him the kind of fantasizing material that he needed, and that's why he was willing to leave. Plus, it probably hurt, but he was willing to leave after that. All right, so Frotteurism is another coercive paraphilia, and this is where the perpetrator rubs their genitals up against an unsuspecting victim. A lot of the time, the victim doesn't even know exactly what happened. All they know is somebody brushed up against their backside. A lot of the time it'll be their backside or their thigh, and they don't really know what happened. There may be plausible deniability for why this person came in contact with them, but for the frotteur, it's very stimulating, very arousing, and so they have information to fuel their fantasies. So in this little cartoon, they're in the bus and they're just sort of jiggling along, and you'll notice that he's inappropriately close behind her. And when they hit a bump, she realizes actually that he has an erection when he's rubbing up against her and her eyes widen. It's not always the case that the person's going to have an erection, though. They oftentimes, with a frotteur, they are sort of like the flaccid exhibitionist, who they have a flaccid penis, and they're really just using this contact as the fuel for arousal that they're going to use later. I had a student a number of years ago who used to work for what in the olden days was called Bon Marché. So if any long-term Washingtonians who know the name of that store, and he was a security person, and so he would be up in the office above and watching the security cameras. And he said they were watching the women's department because there was this man there who they were worried he was going to steal something, because he sort of was skulking around and really hovering around, looking at things, picking them up, putting them back down, just sort of acting a little bit weird. And so the security guards didn't know exactly what was going on. They assumed it was going to be a shoplifting. And so they were watching him, and a woman came into the department and was shopping, and he kind of, again, he was sort of biding his time until she positioned herself between two racks, and then he was able to squeeze between her and one of the racks and accidentally brush up against her butt with his genitals and then go scurrying out of the store. And I was lecturing about this in class, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I think you just explained what we witnessed at the store." And he actually brought the video. We only could watch it in class. He had to take it back. We couldn't keep it. But it was exactly what happened. He waited until she was in a position where it would make sense that he would squeeze past her, and then squeezed past her and then left the store. And because they'd been watching him, they knew he hadn't stolen anything, so they couldn't figure out what he had done. And she had no idea. She did not even look when he brushed up against her. He said something like, "Excuse me," as he went by, and she just, basically ignored him and had no idea what exactly had happened. That's really common in Frotteurism, where, the victim literally doesn't even know what happened, and now they're the target of these fantasies. Now, sexual sadism is when you need an unwilling partner to display suffering. So with sexual sadism, we're often going to find out that this is a sociopath, a person who might escalate from like small infliction of pain to bigger, to might culminate in murder. I didn't want to get a picture of sexual sadism, so I got a cartoon that's sort of a sadistic thing to do. It's not sexually sadistic, it's just sadistic. So here's this person who's sleeping in the sleep lab. Apparently he's got, maybe he snores or something, so they're tracking him. And look at the scientists outside the window. They're all giggling because they know that the scientist on the inside is about to hit the cymbals and startle this guy awake, and that's pretty sadistic, right? That's the premise, except for the sadism would be sexually oriented. So the sadist would be sexually aroused by inflicting suffering. I don't know if these scientists in the cartoon are going to get sexually aroused from what they're doing or not. But a person who maybe wants to spank their partner and their partner says, "Ow, stop it," and then they do it harder. That is a little bit of what we're talking about. It's, "Ow, stop it." Even, we don't have a safe word because I didn't know that you were going to spank me. So I just said, "Ow, stop that." And then they do it harder because they kind of like it that you didn't expect to be experiencing pain. And clearly you are experiencing pain. So I'm going to do it again. It might start off something small and then over time can develop into bigger things and could in fact culminate in murder at the end. And a lot of times then you'll see also defacing of the body and other things. Now there are certain coercive paraphilias that fall under the category of statutory rape, and zoophilia is one of them. You might have heard of zoophilia referred to as bestiality or bestiality, some people pronounce it. The idea is that you're sexually attracted to animals and the sexual functioning involves animals. It oftentimes will involve sadism because animals aren't necessarily designed to have sex with humans, and so it may harm the animal. This is one of those statues off of that monument I've been showing you all quarter, and so this is something that's been part of sexual behavior for a really long time. But you'll notice that the person in the back of the donkey, I'm assuming that's a donkey, it's kind of small to be a horse, right? So the person in the back of the donkey has a facial expression that doesn't look, super passionate. It looks a little bit more sadistic, right? A little more like willing to be harmful. Recently, 2005, they discovered a place out in Enumclaw, which is on the west side of Washington State, for those of you who don't know. And it's a small town, very rural, and it turned out that there was this bestiality farm there where you could go and have sex with different animals at this location. And it was discovered when a guy had gone out to have sex with a horse, and the guy wanted to be penetrated by the horse. He was not the penetrator. He wanted the horse to penetrate him. And it caused a bunch of internal damage to him. And so when they dropped him off outside the emergency room there in Enumclaw, and nobody stayed to identify him or anything. They just dropped him off and left. Ultimately, he died, and they were able to figure out where he had been and what had been going on. And so what was shocking at the time, I'm highlighting it down at the bottom here, is that Washington was one of 17 states that does not outlaw bestiality. And whenever I tell this in class, my students always act like this is such a shocking piece of information, but it's like, I don't think anybody had ever thought that you had to outlaw it. Like, it seemed sort of like the status quo would be that people don't have sex with animals. And it was surprising to find out that people do, that people pay money to do it. And apparently other people would videotape it. And one of the things that I've linked in our classroom is a documentary called Zoo, that is actually a documentary about what was going on in Enumclaw. And I think the state it had never occurred to anyone that you needed to make it against the law to have sex with animals, and or to videotape people having sex with animals, and or charge money to let people have sex with your animals. Like, I don't think it had ever crossed anyone's mind. So very quickly after this, the law was actually written so that now, in addition to all the other things that are examples of statutory rape, where you're having contact with somebody who can't give their consent, would be animals, because animals they can't refuse, right? And so it's a type of statutory rape, and possibly sadistic, and sometimes deadly to the person to the human who's doing it. How about necrophilia, another type of statutory rape? So here is where a person is, remember, philia means love, necro means death. So we have a person who is sexually attracted to corpses, to dead bodies. Now, sometimes you'll find that a sadist also displays necrophilia after they've murdered their victim, right? They may murder their victim and then have sex with them after they're dead. It's a really just act of dominance, right? That this person can't consent and I can just do whatever I want. Now, necrophilia is one of those cases where we see quite frequently what I was talking about earlier, where people will put themselves into jobs that will get them access to their target. So you'll find out that a person who works at the funeral home is a necrophiliac. That happened when I was in graduate school in Albuquerque. They found out that a guy who was working at the funeral home was having sex with the corpses. And it was, it's just so shocking whenever you hear this. That story is from like 1992 or 3. It's just so shocking to find out that somebody would do something like that. And every time it happens, it's such a shock to find out that people do that. The case that I wanted to share with you in this video is a person who worked in the morgue and had worked in the morgue for a really long time, and then come to find out that he was having sex with the corpses, which is rape. So I will let you guys watch this news footage, and I will see you on the other side.